for a while, and I haven't really known how to go about talking about it until today. Mainly the thing I'm going to talk to you about is going to blow your mind. Concentration camps in America for Americans. It's coming. I've talked about that. I want to talk to you about that bill. It's H.R. 645. You can look it up. It was introduced. Basically states that they're going to take away our rights and round us up for concentration camps. And again, you can Google that. I've got a link posted to everything right under this video. Right underneath this video, you can see all these links. And then I want to talk to you about FEMA coffins. They're real. As you can see here, I've got pictures of them. There's videos of them all over YouTube. Just look for FEMA coffins. You'll see that there's hundreds of thousands, I'd even say millions of these things laying empty. And I'll tell you, as a prior service to this country, that the government does not spend this much money on stuff they don't use. Okay? They're planning on using this, and not later, sooner. Okay? And what I really want to talk to you about is going to really disturb you. Guillotines in America. That's right. They're legalizing cutting heads off again. And they're doing it in Georgia. Now this is going to be the slippery slope. They're going to do it here, and the reason they're doing it is to harvest organs. Because if you get killed in the electric chair, they can't harvest your organs. If you die in the gas chamber from lethal injection, again, they can't harvest your organs. And if you think that the government can't make a fortune off harvesting your organs, last time I checked, for a kidney alone, you can get $40,000. Imagine how much money is involved in that. It's good business, is what it is.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for 30 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. I do want to thank my colleague from Arizona, my friend, Mr. Schweikert, for his steadfast dedication to ensuring the American people are informed, at least the 72 people that were watching C-SPAN while you were extemporaneously educating them. But in all seriousness, we're able to push this out. We're able to do clips. It is important that we continue to have this conversation. The gentleman is correct in very broad terms and very specific terms about the extent to which we've got a fiscal crisis looming, and it is incumbent upon this body to do something about it. And we have structural reforms we could put in place that the gentleman's talking about. And I think we've just covered that quite nicely, but we also need to be aware of what we need to do with our discretionary spending and using the power of the purse both to constrain the bureaucracy that is still a third of that annual spending, and constrain that spending also for the purpose of limiting tyranny over the American people. This is one of those things that frustrates me among my colleagues, both Democrat and Republican, is that they'll come to the floor, and the gentleman from Arizona is not in that group, by the way, because the gentleman from Arizona, I think, largely would agree with what I'm getting at here. But I've got colleagues who will always slip into the, it doesn't matter, stop worrying about discretionary, stop having a fight about $100 billion or $30 billion or whatever your debate is about constraining discretionary spending. When I say that, for the average listener, what I mean is what we spend every year on the stuff you see in the bureaucracy, the Department of Justice, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, all of those things that make up the alphabet soup of government that, frankly, are the things impacting your life every day and or undermining, frankly, your freedoms every day. So the thing that drives me crazy in this town is you'll hear members of Congress, they come down here and they say, Chip, we have a razor-thin majority. Don't you understand? Chip, it's all mandatory spending. You don't have to focus on this $100 billion. We're talking about $35 trillion in debt. That happens all the time. I assume the gentleman from Pennsylvania would agree with me that I assume in his career, he's been here a few years longer than I have, that we hear that as an excuse for ignoring our job to constrain the bureaucracy using the power of the purse. Almost every single day that we come down here to the floor, we're in committee, we're in our conference meetings. I assume the gentleman agrees with me on that point.
Of course I do. we have fought bitterly. I mean, even if you just look at the last few years here, since the pandemic was unexpected, and decisions were made in hindsight that looked like, made obviously some wrong choices. Be that as it may, it was expensive. People were out of work. The government forced them out of work, forced them to close their businesses. It was only right, since the government had the authority and the power to do that, to make them as whole as possible. Now, we can debate that as long as we want to, but subsequent the end of the pandemic, it should have been reasonable for the people in this room on either side of the aisle to say, well, let's just reset back to the pre-pandemic. And believe it or not, at that time, if we had just gone back to that number, the budget would have balanced. We would have actually taken in enough revenue to pay for the things that we were buying. But a substantial portion of this body, unfortunately, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle said, no, we're going to keep spending now at the pandemic level, even though the pandemic's over.
The gentleman is correct. I mean, and I think this is one of the things that I want to stress. I came down here not to talk about spending, but on the heels of our friend from Arizona, I want to make the point and then pivot to what I think is important to talk about, and I'm sure the gentleman will agree. But in the context, it matters, right? What we fund matters. If we're funding the Department of Homeland Security to utterly fail to secure the homeland and endanger our own people and empower migrants to be able to actually flood in and get dumped into the United States, including the individual who was paroled into the United States and killed Laken Riley, including the individuals who were dumped into the United States and shot those two police officers in New York just last week, including the individual who killed a woman named Elizabeth Medina in my own state, killed her. Mom found her in the bathtub. She's supposed to be cheerleading on the streets. I can give example after example. We're funding that. We're funding the DHS that does that. We're funding the FBI that has been politicized against the former president, against our own people like Scott Smith and Mark Houck and other people around the country. We're politicizing the FBI and the Department of Justice that is using the FACE Act to put a 75-year-old woman in jail for 2 years for praying at an abortion facility. You are paying for that, ladies and gentlemen. You, the American taxpayer, are paying for that. And guess what? With all due respect to my Republican colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans are funding it. And they're funding it, and they come down and they say, well, we have a duty to do that. Our Democratic colleagues will say, we must do all these things. You're politicizing this. You're making this. My Republican colleagues will say, well, Chip, of course we would like to do that. Of course we would like to fix it. But you don't understand. You can't do math. We have a razor-thin majority. We can't possibly get it done. By the way, when do they ever talk about the razor-thin majority in the Senate, which exists? Right? And one last point. Has my friend from Pennsylvania heard the same issues? I've already heard, I won't say who, I've already heard very important members of this body in terms of their rank in committee already talking about the fact that no matter what happens in November, if we win the White House, and President Trump is in the White House, if we win the House of Representatives, even grow our majority, if we win back the Senate and have a majority of 2, 3, 4, depending on how you go look at the scoreboard, that we will not have 60 votes. So you're told, unless you can do something on reconciliation, which is a maneuver for all you Americans out there to find a way to bend around the 60 vote threshold in the Senate, well, then you're just stuck. We're sorry. You just have to accept it, Chip. Does the gentleman hear that all the time? And has he already heard members already setting the stage for January to say we can't do the things that we said we would do?
Of course I've heard it. I've heard it ever since I've been here. There's always some reason. We have a slim majority. We don't have a majority at all. We don't have 60. We don't have the presidency. We have this house, not that body. It's the courts. There's always some reason to say we can't do it. And I was in a committee hearing today talking about waste and abuse on foreign affairs. And I found out that we send money to Nepal for atheism, to support atheism. We spend some of your money to Nepal, which is a highly religious society, to support atheism. And what I'm told is well, we've not all bills are perfect. Nobody agrees with that, but we had to get the bill passed. Well, somebody agreed with it. It ended up in there.
Right.
Somebody wanted that, and so I'm supposed to go along with that. And the people that I represent that wake up early in the morning and go to work and pay their taxes, their money's going for that when they can't afford their electricity bill, their food bill, or their daycare bill. It's insane. And then And then this whole thing about a wide open border, not only they can't afford the bills, but their kids can't even get jobs now coming out of high school because they're competing with people that are here illegally who will take those jobs where you start out, where the only skill you had, Mr. Roy from Texas, is I can show up on time with a good attitude. That's the skill I got when I'm 13 or 14 years old, right? That's the skill I had when I started. And you start out doing things that maybe a lot of people don't want to do, but now there are other people in this country with a work permit. Your kids can't even get started anymore, and that's the insult upon injury. You're being taxed out of your homes. You can't afford your bills. Other people are taking your work, and you're being told to sit down and shut up and just take it, whether you're in Congress or, heaven forbid, you're at home watching on TV and you're saying, what do I do about any of this? I've told my representative, and they said I can't stop it.
And in the meantime, and I want to pivot to the border point you just raised, but I would like to make one point. We're funding all of those rules and requirements that are driving the American family out of the ability to afford life. Just today, I had a crack in a windshield, and it was just there at the dealers getting looked at and getting worked on. We couldn't go do a non-dealer part for reasons I won't get into. It was $1,100 for a windshield. They used to be like $200. You call like Safelite or somebody, they come out and they replace the glass. Now it's like, well, you can't just replace the glass because it's got all these sensors in the windshield.
Mandated by the government.
Right, and guess what? Now increasingly all of these things are mandated by the idiots in this chamber.
Like a kill switch.
Right, the idiots in this chamber voted to cause that to happen and back up what the regulators down the street are forcing the average American. So here's what I don't get, right? I'd like all my colleagues here, if I forced my colleagues one by one to go down to the microphone on any one of these issues and explain to their constituents, I am going to vote, as some Republicans did last fall, I'm going to vote against eliminating a kill switch in a car, which is going to dramatically increase the cost of that car, dramatically increase the cost of that windshield, dramatically increase the chance that car is going to shut down in the 20 below zero cold in North Dakota and leave you on the side of the road because you've got a computer determining whether you can start the car. If I made every member go defend that, they'd start to think twice about it because that is a hard thing to defend. But they didn't want to vote against it because MAD came around and lobbied for it. They didn't want to be against that. So 19 Republicans say, no, sorry, I can't vote against killing the kill switch. But if you put it out there in stark, you tell the American people, hey, should we have something in there that protects the people drunk driving? They say, well, I guess so. Oh, what if that would cost you another $10,000 for the car? They'd say, are you out of your friggin' mind? But we do it. And we do it for the same reason Mr. Schweikert was talking about why our healthcare costs are high, because there's an army of lobbyists in town, or there's an army of people who are going to go out and say certain things. And the one thing Mr. Schweikert said when he talked about how we were going to make sure that we are protecting incumbents, he didn't mention about protecting the incumbency of the people in this room. People who hold on to their election certificate like it's the most important damn thing they'll ever have in their life, instead of the opportunity to come here and do what we said we would do. Does the gentleman agree?
I do agree. I do agree with that completely, protecting that. And of course, what we're seeing right now is the protection or the attempted protection of that at the presidential level. For 3.5 years, I've watched the president say, I can't do anything about a wide open border. I can't take any action. There's nothing I can do. It must come from the legislature. Yet somehow, now that all the polls have turned around and it looks ominous in 5 months, somehow he found the wherewithal to say, well, Shazam, I can take executive action. Who knew? Well, the American people knew because before he got there, executive action was taken and the border was relatively secure, much more secure than it is now. And for 3.5 years, it's been wide open. And essentially, our president just acknowledged what we all knew, that this has been meaningful. This has been by design. It has been, the wide open border has been intentional. And he could have done something about it, but he chose not to until he had no other choice politically. And even at that, and I'm sure that my good friend from Texas, who's on the front lines in Texas, is going to talk about the provisions of this. One I find interesting, well, we're going to stop these people coming in once we hit the threshold unless they're minor unaccompanied children. Unless they're minor unaccompanied children. We're going to allow the sex trafficking of children to continue. It's even as we know that our federal government has lost track of literally tens of thousands of children illegally in our country unaccompanied.
85,000 documented in one case for sure. Right?
85,000, right? Yeah.
And I'm glad the gentleman brings this issue up because, I would note that today, while I was sitting in the House Judiciary Committee with the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley, who just came to join us, who's going to take the microphone, I'm sure, in a little bit, we had the Attorney General before us, and we were questioning the Attorney General in the House Judiciary Committee. In that exchange, I was asking the Attorney General about the extent to which he believes that it is wrong for Texas to have passed what we call SB 4 in Texas to empower Texans to do the job of stopping people from being released into the United States contrary to law and endangering the people of Texas, that has led directly to the death of Texans. Does he believe, as the Attorney General of the United States, that it is wrong for Texas to do that? And the reason I ask him that question is because as the Attorney General of the United States, he is, of course, leading litigation to stop us. He is suing Texas, taking us to court to try to prevent us from doing it. Because it says that, supremacy clause, the federal government is supposed to do this. You don't have a say. Well, hold on a second. If the federal government is supposed to secure the border of the United States and manage this inflow of people, and it is violating the laws and dumping people into the United States, are we saying that the people of Texas can't, under the invasion clause or otherwise, say it is our duty as the people of Texas to protect our citizens and our people? The Attorney General, of course, said, no, he's got to take us to court and go sue us. And the fact is, he's therefore ignoring.
When is the invasion clause operable then?
Well, I think he would say it is not.
When is it?
I think he would say if you've got a literal army of people coming across the river, but I think they would probably fight us on that.
So if you came across with a gun and you were wearing a uniform with your name on it, that's an invasion. But if you don't have a gun and you don't have a uniform, no matter what your intentions are or the scale, that's not an invasion.
I'm not sure that they have stipulated the former, but they certainly want to try to stop us from identifying and recognizing the latter. And the reality is that the people of Texas are fed up and they're asking their leaders to do the job the federal government won't do. And we're sitting here, and look, I want to compliment Republicans. I'm not afraid to criticize Republicans or Democrats, both. I want to compliment Republicans for having done a year ago what we've never done, which is set aside the absurdity of saying you've got to do amnesty and setting aside the absurdity of saying you've got to open the floodgates to more people coming into the country, even though we allow about 1 million people a year to come in.
Legally.
Even though we have 51.5 million people in the United States who are foreign born. You have the Chamber of Commerce, you have all of the big interests coming down here saying, you guys have got to open up more immigration, you have to do it. And we always bow down and we always say, okay, we'll do that and we'll do amnesty, but can we get just some security, beg for crumbs? A year ago, we did something different. We came together as Republicans and we passed the most comprehensive, the strongest border security bill we've ever passed. My colleagues, frankly, I don't think fully understand the historical importance of that. Even many who support it and talk about it and tweet about it. Because I've been here for some various forms. Now, 5 years as a member of Congress. I was here as Chief of Staff, Senator Ted Cruz. I was on the Senate Judiciary Committee as a lawyer. And I watched the debates and the failures and the gangs of eight and all of the machinations. I watched in 2017 when we had two different bills, so-called Good Lat 1, Good Lat 2. We left President Trump stranded. We blew it. Last year, we came together. We set the terms of what we will now do next year. That matters. When Republicans unite to achieve something, not unity for the sake of it. I get so tired of hearing my colleagues talk about unity, and I say something like, to do what? Well, it doesn't matter. We've just got to unite. To do what? Right? When we unite to say we're going to stand up and say we're going to secure the border of the United States, we did it. We didn't always agree, by the way. People sweep aside our differences of opinion a year ago. We fought through it. We met. We worked. And we passed the best border security bill we've ever passed. The Senate has sat on it. And they tried to pass a sham bill, which the president today went to the microphone and gave up the game. Yeah. He went to the microphone. Remember the Senate bill? The Senate bill said, oh, don't worry, guys, we're going to cap the flow at 5,000.
A day.
A day, which, by the way, Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, said 1,000 a day was basically a crisis, right? Oh, we're going to cap it at 5,000 a day, rest easy, but we're going to have all these exceptions. We're going to have exceptions for unaccompanied children, exceptions for parolees when we're violently just dumping people into the United States under parole, exceptions for foreign nationals who use the CBP One app, which is another version of parole. We objected, and all the Democrats are like, you guys are not doing this bipartisan bill. Guess what the president did today? He went to the microphone and he looked at America and he said, we need to regain control of the border. The President of the United States today acknowledged to everybody watching and to every American that we do not have control of the border. That is what the President did today. The President also went to the microphone today and he said, hey, I'll cap it at 2,500. If the President of the United States has the authority today to issue an order to cap it at 2,500, did he not have that authority 2 months ago, or 6 months ago, or 2 years ago, or 3.5 years ago? Of course he did. And that gives up the game on the Senate bill when they said they'd cap it at 5,000 and the president comes in 3 months later. Why? Because he's looking at polls and he's looking at his butt getting kicked and he's looking at losing the House and the Senate and he's like, oh crap, I got to do something to actually look like I care about the border when everybody in America knows I don't. So he did it, and he went to the microphone and he said it, and he made a joke of the Senate bill that all of those Senate Democrats and all of our Democratic colleagues have been lying to the American people that we've been obstructing good bills when they're the ones that put forward a sham bill, and the president made it clear today. Does the gentleman agree?
I agree completely, and the historical perspective of what we accomplished in the House over a year ago now with the most righteous border security bill ever to pass out of the House is to give members of the House of Representatives and the Senate the alternative. So when the president says, well, you haven't done anything over there, you haven't passed anything, and you won't pass the bipartisan bill. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Speaker, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's awesome when it can be bipartisan, but what's more awesome is when it can be correct, when it actually is the solution to the problem. The Senate bill, so-called border protection bill that allows 5,000 people every single day to hemorrhage across our border illegally, is not a solution. It's not a solution to an open border. It's just a codification of an open border. The fact that some of my friends on the other side of the aisle didn't want to vote in favor of securing the border shouldn't be a reason for the president to say, you haven't done anything. We get that he doesn't like it. He doesn't like it because it actually would have secured the border. That goes to the point. It was always his intention. It's always been his intention. It's always been the intention of my friends on the other side of the aisle to leave the border wide open as long as they possibly could and get away with it. And the only reason it's changing now is because the polls reflect that the American people are, number one, sick of it, and number two, know they are being lied to, and know that the president has the authority and the ability to secure the border. I yield to the gentleman from Texas.
I want to ask the gentleman a quick question, and then I want to leave both of us a little time in the end. We've got about 9 minutes left, I want to give a chance for us to talk a little bit about June 6th, which is coming up a couple days. But I want to ask one thing today, and that we just talked about the border. We've just talked about the extent to which they're wide open, being ignored, endangering the American people. It's purposeful. We just talked about the Attorney General suing to get in the front of the Texas, being able to try to secure our borders. I just want to point out the extent to which the current administration is defying and undermining the rule of law on a daily basis. And all of this is wrapped up and undermined. We sit here in this chamber, and we sit here under Moses, and we sit here in recognition of the importance of the rule of law. This administration is at war with the rule of law. The borders are open, ignoring the law. Student loan repayments, ignoring the Supreme Court and the law to try to buy votes. You've got wide open streets and criminals on the streets, and we're not prosecuting crimes that we need to prosecute. And importantly, you have an administration hell-bent on trying to use the political apparatus to target a former president and to use it in direct violation of everything we understand and know about the importance of blind justice. You cannot get away from that reality. Today, right, we have an attorney general who is choosing to target one president and say, I'm going to charge you with a crime, right? And then choosing not to charge the other president for basically the same crime, right? With the classified record stuff. You've got the Attorney General of the United States saying, well, I'm not going to turn over audio of the very rationale for why Special Counsel Hur said, no, we shouldn't go after the current president because, frankly, he's not mentally able to do it and he will be a sympathetic figure. They don't want to turn over the audio even though it's the same material. And the Attorney General testified to that today. That is an abomination to the rule of law, while you've got the New York prosecutor in complete and obvious coordination with the Attorney General, where the deputy, the number 3, goes up and works with the DA in New York, and they prosecute the former president of the United States. They prosecute him on a state law charge, but then they bastardize and shove into it, shoehorn in a federal charge they won't even define. And then they use that to run through multiple charges that most observers say may not even get through the state system without the state, I think they call it not the Court of Appeals, but the Superior Court, their Supreme Court in New York, that they'll throw it out. Now, we got 6 minutes. I want to get this other issue. But does the gentleman see the problem with what's happening to the rule of law, the very foundation that causes migrants to want to come here, and the strength of this economy, of this country?
I do, and I lament this. I say this often. The gentleman from Texas has heard me say that this is the Constitution of the United States of America, Madam Speaker. It's a quick read. You can probably read that in less than an hour. You can see, everybody can see it's a piece of paper. It cannot defend itself.
Correct.
There it is, laying on the desk. But this is the owner's manual. This is the operator's manual. This is the set of instructions for running your country. And we all take an oath to follow this thing. But if you're not going to, if you choose not to, this Constitution can do nothing about it. Can do nothing. It takes people of integrity, people that are willing to sacrifice their own personal viewpoints on occasion, or what I call the avarice of man, their own personal greed, the things that they want for the sake of this. But when people refuse to do this, refuse to do that, and just use the awesome authority granted to them in a position, whether it's electoral or otherwise, in places like the Department of Justice, well, that's what we have today, right? That's what we have today, which is a Soviet-style show trial to go after your political rivals. This is the thing of dictators and tyrants. One of the practitioners I saw this week before I came in, he was talking about, he said, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yep.
I said, it's not crazy. It's tyranny. It's tyranny.
And I assume the gentleman would agree with me, and I'm going to switch topics, but it's a transition that makes it more meaningful, that when the boys walked into the wall of bullets that they walked into at Normandy in 1944, that they weren't doing it to toss aside the rule of law and the Constitution and all that this country stands for. I have chosen not to go to Normandy and make the trip. I didn't wear the uniform. I want to leave it to those who did. Some who wore the uniform aren't going. And I want the gentleman to comment on this, as he served for almost 3 decades or something along those lines in the United States Armed Forces. This, and just so everybody knows, right, today's June 4th. In 2 days, it'll be 80 years since those men got in those boats, jumped out into the stormy seas, walked onto the sand, ran into a wall of bullets, went up the cliffs, and then went all the way to Bastogne, to Germany, went through all of what they went through. This is the message from General Eisenhower on the order of June 6th, 1944.
The eyes of the world are upon you.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these past months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hope and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on our other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940 and 41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Those words speak for themselves. We honor and tribute those who lost their lives, those who fought, those who came home, those few World War II veterans who remain with us. I will turn over the remaining about a minute and a half to my friend who wore the uniform that I did not wear.
Well, no words that we can use today can adequately honor the sacrifices of those who gave the last full measure and signed up to do it. I mean, there's just no way you can describe what they endured and what they knew where they were going to endure. Many of them never made it off the beach. Many of them never made it out of the boat. But so many of them even joined up and lied about their age so they could go fight for what they believed in, this country, this idea. The idea that everybody is equal under the law, that no one person is more important than another person, that you can make decisions for your life based on what you want to do. You can buy the gas stove that you want or not buy any stove at all. You can buy a car with a windshield sensor in it or no windshield sensor in it. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Speaker, they didn't give their lives. They didn't give their lives for this government here that we have now, that bankrupts their families, that puts the fear of the government in them if they say something, that they're going to be hauled off to jail in the middle of the night or be drawn out on the lawn in their shorts in the wee hours of the morning. Yet that's what we have right now. Madam Speaker, we need to honor the commitment they made for the country that they loved that existed then. That's the best thing we can do.
Amen. I appreciate the gentleman. I yield back.